Welcome to HealthCast, the heartbeat of health IT. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research, and today we have a special bonus episode featuring our May 9th GovFocus, Federal Health Tech Leaders Combat AI Bias. Now, you may be asking yourself, Alex, what is a GovFocus? Great question. A GovFocus is a virtual video panel that brings together government and industry tech leaders to discuss solutions to many of the challenges facing government today. These in-depth conversations are typically available as videos on our website, but for today's episode, we're sharing a recent favorite. If you're interested in watching the full video and exploring our archive, please visit governmentciomedia.com/GovFocus. And now, enjoy our GovFocus on combating AI bias, featuring Gil Alterovitz, Director of NIE at VA, and Dr. Samir Antani, Principal Investigator, National Library of Medicine at NIH.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this GovFocus on combating AI bias in healthcare. I'm Sarah Seibert, Senior Researcher with GovCIO Media and Research, and I'll be moderating this discussion. With me, we have Gil Alterovitz, Director of the Department of Veterans Affairs, National Artificial Intelligence Institute, and Samir Antani, Principal Investigator at the National Library of Medicine. Thank you both for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Great to be.
Yeah, so to start our conversation, could you provide a brief overview of your position and how you work with AI? Samir, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks. So I'm a principal investigator at the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health. And what that really means is I'm a scientist, and I've been so for about 2 decades now. I have been a career scientist at the NLM, looking at various aspects of understanding visual as an image content with medical images. From the perspective of retrieval, and more lately with terms of understanding the content as it relates to diseases in these images, and that translates to applying machine learning algorithms and AI algorithms for detecting these.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to learning more. And Gil, what's your background?
Certainly. So right now I'm over here as the director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute, which is seeking to build that AI capacity and enable research and development and translating that into the health and well-being of our veterans, right? That's our central mission. And to do that, we're working on in a number of areas, whether it be to enable the people to do that work, the right policies, the right partnerships, the right pilots and related projects to move forward in that area.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I've loved tracking your work. So how do you each define bias, especially when we're talking about bias in healthcare? Samir, would you like to start?
So bias, as it relates to artificial intelligence algorithms, is the notion that the decisions or the predictions made by these methods are favoring one group, whether fairly or unfairly, rather than giving a balanced decision that is more cognizant of the problem at hand and not so much affected by the training data that went into the algorithm design itself or the model itself.
So let's go back here. Okay.
Gil,
Thanks so much for that question on bias. I think I'd agree with Samir on that. I just also want to add that there's also kind of an area that may be broader than looking at demographic balance and data representativeness. And we often also look at the NIST definition and to look at other areas such as, so we can have systemic bias, we can have computational statistical biases, and human cognitive biases, where that may relate to how an individual or group may perceive an AI system and that information when they're making a decision or when they're filling in missing information, and how humans really think about how these AI systems work, how they function, and their overall role and their purpose.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Samir, you alluded to some of your work in your intro, but I'd be interested in learning more about how you're using AI to identify and combat diseases and health risks.
Well, certainly. So what I listed off in the intro was I think of the object of my research interest as the medical image or the medical video, depending on the modality that is being used for detecting disease. It could be echocardiography videos, for example. That's one interest area that we have, where we are tracking cardiac myopathy for sickle cell disease patients. And we are applying machine learning to actually detect the right atrial pressure automatically and make it consistent with human observations, therefore bringing in as a degree of standardization across all these automated predictions. Similar work is being done with oral cancer. We also have detecting tuberculosis in HIV positive and HIV negative individuals, both adults and children. The children tends to be a little harder problem to solve, and a litany of other diseases. There's some published work with for working with many years with the NCI on cervical cancer for women, detecting it reliably and observing that different devices, even in fact, also produce a undesirable bias effect, where the algorithm becomes more sensitive to some devices than others in making a robust and reliable prediction.
Right, that's really interesting. And a key word that popped out to me was that standardization to make sure you're combating bias. And I know over the past few years, there have been several executive orders and policies that have come about outlining how AI should be developed, focusing on trustworthiness and equity. So, Gil, could you discuss how policy has changed or evolved as AI is becoming increasingly more integrated into the healthcare landscape?
Yes, I think there have been a number of areas that really have moved forward in this AI space. So, you can always go back more, but, if we go back, the last, a little over 5 years ago, then you go to the first national AI research and development strategic plan that was released around 2016-ish. And that was looking at these overall strategy with a number of principles there that continue to develop, right? So things often start in research and development, and then they then kind of pervade through other areas, right? So after that, we saw an executive order on promoting the use of trustworthy AI in the federal government as a whole. We also saw promoting and maintaining American AI work. That was another executive order that came out. So we had 13960, 13859 that focused on enabling data sets, originally around research and development, but later also so that they could be used by industry and by others from different types of data sets. And so that really helps set the foundation, right? When you have these trustworthy AI principles, which also set up that executive order, also set up the AI officials to work together on these different areas and to ensure that these principles are going forward. Another afterwards, as we see these principles, then there's also a question of, are there more items to focus on and how do you implement them? So there have been new things that came out just this past year. For example, the White House AI Bill of Rights, which really provided this blueprint to look at and principles around how do you have equitable and ethical use of automated systems, which can include those with AI. And then just recently, just about a month or so ago, we saw an executive order 14091, which was around further advancing racial equity and supporting for underserved communities through the federal government. And that included this co-equal principle around promoting and ensuring equity as well. And then we've seen agencies coming out with things, right? The VA's had its different frameworks. NIST came out with the AI risk management framework. We just saw that also a couple months ago, which helps guide everyone around doing a risk-based guidance for designing, implementing, and assessing these AI systems. So there's been a lot of work, and I think it's interesting how it kind of started in this sort of R&D area, and then it kind of migrated to government, to enabling government and others to do that by looking at opening up these data sets, and then migrating toward defining principles and then ensuring detailed implementation of those principles, including around ethics and equity.
Right. It's been really exciting to watch that boom. I think you joined me on HealthCast at the end of 2022, and you're like, stay tuned for 2023. It's going to be a huge year for AI. And you have not let me down on that. So, Samir, with all of these policies that are coming about and this push to create more trustworthy AI, how are you in your work developing algorithms and advancing deep learning techniques to recognize health risk predictors?
So I'd like to break that question down a little.
Yeah.
One aspect is that we look at, from an algorithmic advancement standpoint, given a data set that is acquired in a clinic, for example, or a hospital system, or different parts of the world, for whatever sources there might be, you have less control on how the data was acquired. So on one aspect, we work with advancing the technology itself, better networks that are more exploratory about different characteristics of the data. And the other is to study the characteristics of the data themselves. How much data do we have? How is it distributed? What is the variety in terms of populations, in terms of disease expression, in terms of devices that were used for acquiring these data, in terms of the protocols, the clinical protocols that vary from region to region for various reasons? How much do they affect the kinds of data that you're looking at, and inherently the data quality itself? All of these factors are playing some role, even if you have the kind of data that covers the aspect of fairness in terms of the different ethnicities, for example, or different geographical regions and such. You still have to pay attention to these details. And so my work, in addition to advancing medical AI, is also looking at mechanisms to detect these aspects, and also discover or develop means of how can we adjust and adapt to the data that we have by either synthesizing new data or in other ways, as it's called, as pre-processing the data, so that you have a balanced data set that's been given to the AI for learning the characteristics of these various diseases.
Right, that's really interesting. And that leads perfectly into my next question. So Gil, how are you improving data management at your unit to have, in turn, more accurate AI? And Samir, if there's anything you'd like to add after Gil, feel free.
Yeah, so data management, it's really core to not only AI, but really any kind of inference and predictive analytics. And so, in that it is both used to build the model. And if you kind of think about a model as essentially almost like a compressed type of data in a sense as well. So when you're managing the models themselves. And so we have a couple different things going on at the VA. If you think about it, there are really kind of two things to think about. How do you govern that data, right? And there's a data governance console. We're a member of that. And it goes across offices. It is something that brings together a number of different offices at the VA. There is a structure kind of with a number of different subconsoles under that. There's also different work groups, such as data analytics work group, where we can learn from each other around different items in this area. And so that's kind of one avenue. The other is thinking about and kind of building and enabling these different structures in a way that can be used by the different parties, right? And so thinking about and leveraging kind of this single veteran data object for planning, for doing analytics. That's one of the things that's being looked at the VA as well. And then collaborations, learning from how different offices are working with data and other agencies, right? So there's some data, for example, that is within the VA, but then there's others that may be linked and that's in other agencies. So, for example, CMS, right? Like a lot of veterans will actually get their drug-based benefits through CMS, right? As they're older, through programs like that. And so there's ways to link that data and agreements and understandings to be able to work with the data like that from other agencies as well. So with that, I'll pass it on, I guess, to Samir as well. I guess CMS is part of HHS. I know you interact with them as well.
No, I think, Gil, you covered the topic fairly well. The only point I'd add is in the aspect on the technology side, in the aspect of detection of fairness in the algorithms, you have to be aware of which are the sensitive variables and which are those that are more resilient to change and may not affect the outcome as much. And balancing access, management of data, and the development of these algorithms is like three legs of a stool, if you will, and they all have to work in balance.
Right, that's a great way to put it. So, Samir, as you're developing these tech tools and innovative techniques to improve healthcare, how are you combating algorithmic bias to improve treatment and care for minority populations?
The way that's a tough one to answer for a researcher, especially because we are so headstrong in trying to build the next better algorithm with whatever data we have access to, that very often the first reaction is, let me build something. And then, but the nature of the game also is to publish the work that we do. And so what we also don't want to be doing is leading people to believe that your method has also been tested for fairness. And that's one aspect that we have become very sensitive to lately in looking at these algorithms that are particularly getting tuned to certain features that are so strong, but might be excluding certain segments of society, perhaps. So it is a tug in both directions. In one side, there is very little annotated medical data available, particularly in the imaging space, that has been verified and validated by clinicians for developing these algorithms. On the other side, given that you have sparse data or highly skewed data, you want to get as wide a geographic distribution as you can. And the two examples that we have in some of my research is one that I was alluding to cervical cancer earlier. 15 to 18 sites worldwide are beginning to contribute their studies toward this research, therefore diversifying the kinds of images that come into this to the research platform, if you will, but also pressing before us as researchers the issues that when you have a diverse data set and you train on one kind and you start testing on the other kind, you have the issues of catastrophic forgetting, which is where it starts shifting the domain from one to the other, etc. The other work that I'm doing with this with pediatric TB in HIV positive and negative kids is that we are seeking data from 12 different sites worldwide, something analogous to the cervical cancer work. But again, the emphasis there is to get as wide a distribution as possible that covers the various protocols and expressions of disease. At the same time, we have to disambiguate now. Was it the protocol that caused the bias to appear, which it will, and you have to control for that? Or was it the device that did it? Or was it the kind of disease that's prevalent in that region, part of the world, that did it? And so as researchers, we are constantly in a loop, if you will, trying to solve these problems and advancing science and healthcare.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that VA recently established its AI Institutional Review Board and the AI Oversight Committee that adds that layer of governance. So, Gil, what is the intent of these groups and how do they evaluate the fairness and transparency of using AI tools within research and clinical operations?
Right, right. As you mentioned, the goal is to enable us to look at these different issues around bias, around these trustworthy AI principles that are encoded in these executive orders 13960, 14091. As well as overall principles in AI Bill of Rights and so forth. So what we do is actually have these committees are these institutional review boards, for example, they're already existing in these different medical centers. They are already reviewing different research and development proposals. That's kind of like one side of the coin, so to speak. And what we have basically added is an AI module that gives them additional questions, additional things to think about as they are starting to look at projects that now include that. So just as an example, transparency, may be an issue on the models and so forth. And so a couple of these projects were identified like that, and then looked at to ensure that they were more transparent. The other aspect, as I mentioned, that's kind of one side of the coin, that R&D, which is often kind of at that leading edge, also in terms of the looking at the policies and so forth. And then the second piece is clinical types of operations, right, at medical center, which is part of the oversight boards that we now have a pilot of that ongoing in Long Beach, and there are other sites that have expressed an interest to kind of learn from that work, to look at when there are different items that are looking to be used in clinical operations before they actually get used. And so there are some similarities and differences, right? They both look at projects before essentially they are launched, I would say, right? So that's kind of good to make sure that things are kind of known early. They both have mechanisms to ensure kind of set guardrails on the projects and so forth. And they're not the only, I just want to mention, they're not the only ones that we have, right? So as part of the Data Governance Council, as part of the work that we're doing, there are a number of other projects other than clinical, other than these R&D projects that are also looked at within the requirements that exist within EO 13960 to make sure that they're following these different principles, and they get done from the design stage until the end. That's, I think, what's really important, that you don't kind of wait until it's already running, but as soon as possible when it's being designed, to make sure that you look at any issues around bias and so forth from the beginning, so that you're using the right data sets before you actually are building the model.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I know VA is huge. I have 400,000 employees, I think the last time I checked, and a bunch of different medical centers. So as you're integrating AI, what role does workforce training play in ensuring that it's trustworthy and ethical? And what are some of VA's training programs that are supporting that?
Yes, it's, I think workforce, if you think about it, that's a really great way to get at all the things that I mentioned from the beginning, right? Because if you have a trained workforce, they will know to ensure, to look at to make sure that their data sets are not biased, to make sure that they're building the models in a correct way, right? In a way that doesn't introduce new issues as well, and to validate and so forth, right? And so there are a number of different workforce programs, and there are a number of ones that are being looked at in the future. There's one we recently had an event for, actually, the Aspire program, which is all services personnel readiness engine, which is basically a way to assess people's knowledge, and then and find the right custom path for them given their current knowledge and skills. And so That is one program that we are piloting, and we're working with a number of other agencies as well. We recently had an event around one of the pilot results from that. And there are other ones as well. And so what we do is we learn from these, and then we can see which path can really be great to move forward. And that's another area where we actually learn, there are other agencies. I think you mentioned the VA is large, right? It's the largest civilian agency. We've been interacting with and learning from other agencies on what they're looking at, because we're all facing some of the same issues on the workforce, right? There are issues around retention, recruitment, talent development of people who are already in the VA who may be able to do certain AI roles, whereas where they were not originally trained for that, right? So those are all different pieces sort of the puzzle around workforce.
Yeah, the Aspire program is super cool. I love learning more about that. So you mentioned that you're integrating lessons learned. I'd like to dive a little deeper into that. So for both of you, what are some of the lessons learned through your AI work, and how are you applying them on important health problems in the current landscape? Samir, would you like to start?
Sure. So lessons learned. I think we are constantly learning lessons all the time. It's a number of times we fall and pick ourselves up, I think is the better way to put it. But we are become very sensitive to the very nature of AI in medicine and AI in healthcare, that it is inherently data centric. It also is affected by the use of medical technology that resulted in the capturing of the data itself. And so you're sort of dealing with both aspects and trying to disambiguate these toward meeting the clinical goal. So as a researcher, of course, we, like I said before, we are constantly trying to improve the algorithmic performance, the reliability in the predictions, avoiding flip-flopping, sometimes bizarre flip-flopping where the same patient who we know has disease appears at a future visit and is classified or misclassified as being disease-free, which is unlikely and not true. So detecting these instance-level failures and combining them with more systemic challenges that the model at large may be having, and correcting at both these levels is an important aspect of our work.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And Gil, in terms of lessons learned, how are you implementing those?
Yes, I think when you have lessons learned, I think what you basically do is, or what we've been looking at is, kind of this iterative approach, right? So maybe the best way is, to look at an example, right? So in COVID, you may have, for example, a predictive model, and it may be perfectly suitable at that point in time in COVID, right? But as you have new variants over time, you may have model drift, right? And so you kind of need to keep updating the model. You need kind of this learning healthcare system. And there may also be differences in that, a model maybe, or, at some point you see that, in the early days, right, that it was COVID was kind of moving different geographical regions, right? And so a model built in one place may not apply to another. Similarly, with models built outside the VA, would they work in the VA? That is a common one that we often need to look at. And so being able to have a way to evaluate different models in different situations, and then quickly leverage that knowledge to make an update. That is something that I think we've seen. That's kind of in the model predicting building area. And then in the kind of the policy area, this is a fast-moving field, right? As you said, 2023 is kind of becoming this year of AI in some sense. It seems almost every day there's a new announcement of something, and there are a lot of things, especially around that new generative AI space, right? And so when you have a new area, there's sometimes new types of risks and benefits to look at. People talk about there's this issue around so-called hallucination, right? These models, it's something that didn't really exist in certain types of other AI models that were in the past used for chatbots and so forth, right? And so the lesson is really to always, when there's a new technology, to be able to evaluate, because it may have new types of risks, even though it looks the same to the world, like, oh, this is a chatbot, or, but it now has different potential risks than a rule-based one that may have been done just a couple of years ago.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that leads perfectly into the last question. So, with the boom of AI in 2023 that we've seen so far, what do you both think the future of AI in healthcare looks like? Samir, would you like to start?
Sure. So looking out of the window from a researcher's desk at the world and the impact that AI is having and can have, I'm forever the hopeful, person who hopes to see it making a great impact. Reducing the errors that occur in clinical practice, enhancing the efficiencies for the clinicians, so that they can provide the best care that is possible, and it can serve as a meaningful adjunct to the decision-making process in the clinical workflow. So, but all of these dreams are driven by two factors: the R&D engine and the controls that are put in place through any of the policies and implementation details of the engineering of the AI. So I look fondly outside.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it too. And Gil, what are you looking forward to, or what do you expect?
Yeah. Well, I think there's there's some things that you can see ahead, right? By just looking at what's going on in R&D laboratories and so forth. And then there's sometimes things that just kind of, they lead to kind of this exponential jump, right? And I think we are essentially at this kind of moment where AI is able to do some things as well as humans in some task areas, right? And that number is growing larger. And once it kind of passes that, it continues to grow exponentially. Whereas, human capabilities, through evolution, it's growing much more slowly, right? And so I think we'll be really surprised by that exponential growth in capabilities of the ones where it is right now at the level of human level perception in a number of areas. It will move very quickly soon. And so some of these areas, I think, will be in the generative AI space that we've seen. I think we've seen a lot in the text area, but that integration of text, imaging, sound, all of those different modalities is going to enable new types of medicine to be done in a more efficient way than it was in the past. We're going to, of course, have to deal with some of the new risks that there are, and that's where it's going to be important to have the human in the loop. And that's another reason why I think in the future, some of the things that we'll see, while it may seem really exciting that, around diagnosis and all that, I think we'll see a lot in efficiency, things kind of behind the scenes. That's where I think we'll see a lot of the things where you also have a human in the loop looking at that, and where we'll see a lot of increases in efficiency that will give physicians, caregivers, others more time to work with the patient and less time taking notes and doing administrative tasks.
Right, that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. And I would love to touch base with both of you again soon. I love hearing your thoughts about this topic. So thank you both again for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I think this was a fantastic opportunity to talk about this important topic because AI bias in healthcare, like we just discussed right now, has tremendous promise and also has a fair amount of risk that needs to be controlled. And it's good to see that various parts of the government are not only funneling the R&D effort to advance the science, but also applying the necessary policy controls to ensure that there is risk mitigation to the best possible. And I have known and worked with Gil for a long time on various other committees. And I'm happy to have him with me as a collaborator and colleague on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Samir, it's great to be on with you all again. It's a number of times that we've had interactions before, and it's really just, I think, fascinating to see how much, even since our last conversations, right, AI has advanced, some things that maybe were not as imaginable of being having such a large impact on a population, across the U.S. population potentially, is something that we now see. Right, it is gone from small pilots to at the VA we've got looking at actually using AI in different AI assisted colorectal screening. It's happening in actual locations. Richmond, Albuquerque, Tucson, Hudson Valley, Iron Mountain, across the VA. These things are now coming into play and helping patients in today.
Yeah,
So
it's really exciting. And I appreciate you both. Thank you again. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Healthcast, along with GovCast and Cybercast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.